So there's really there's layers and layers and layers on top of this thing. And there's enough blame to go around, myself included. But I think that the major learnings from this is that if you've got an economic model, you can't sort of, you can't make it sick with trying to add on additional stuff. I tell people now, it's like you probably could have had impermanent loss protection, but no liquidity mining, or the other way around. It's like you just can't have both, right? There is, there is an economic cost to both of these things, and to try and do both simultaneously, I think was insane. And at the time, if you say that to people, you just, they treated you like Judas or something. It was a very unpopular opinion that liquidity mining isn't even real yield, right? It's just a smoke and mirrors, way to sort of get people, attracted to the project. But realistically, that value has to come from somewhere, and just printing tokens doesn't actually get you over the line. So it was this symphony of problems really that kind of came to a head in June of last year.
Welcome to Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel, where we explore projects in decentralized finance that are innovating and driving our mission of financial freedom forward. Thank you for listening. If you like what you hear, please subscribe, rate, and review Mission DeFi and spread the word by posting a tweet to the show. All opinions expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests are their opinions and do not reflect the opinions of Black Knox, Material Indicators, or any other affiliated organizations. You should not treat any opinion expressed by Brad Nickel or his guests as an inducement to make a particular investment, follow a particular strategy, or become involved with any project. A project being featured on the show is not an endorsement of that project in any way. This podcast is for informational purposes only. Now, here's Mission DeFi with Brad Nickel.
I'm excited today to have Mark Richardson returning to the show because Mark was a fantastic guest. He's from the protocol called Bancor, and we had a great episode, really fantastic deep dive into Bancor and what it was doing and where it was going. And there was some really exciting developments happening with the newest version of the protocol on the project. And the team has had some difficulties over the last year, and we're going to get into that in a little bit. But first, Mark, thanks so much for coming on to talk about it. We're excited to hear about your new product, Carbon, that's coming out and learning all about it today. But please, if you could, give us a bit of an introduction, because you have a really interesting background as well as a really interesting role with Bancor and the products. And so I'd love for people to kind of get an understanding of how you got here and what you do for the project itself.
Yeah, for sure. So yeah, thank you for having me back, Brad. It's really nice to speak with you again. Okay, so a little bit about myself. I'm an organic chemist, by training. I completed my Bachelor of Science with a major in chemistry from Macquarie University in Sydney. I did my PhD at the University of Melbourne. I did my first postdoc at the University of California, Irvine, where I also was I had my own cohort of students in first and second year chemistry classes. I also had my own PhD students that I was sort of supervising underneath Professor Weiss. When I came back from California back to Australia, I joined the Australian government's scientific agency called the CSIRO, where I had a 3-year fellowship. And that was beginning in 2020. Oh God, when was that? Feels like a lifetime ago now.
Right? Absolutely.
So it would have been 2019. And the project there was basically to continue with a lot of work that I've been doing on sort of nanoscale sensing devices with biomedical applications. And the German government, through an award scheme called the DAAD, had actually offered me a grant to visit Berlin and complete a pretty significant length of work under Peter Seeberger at Max Planck. And that trip was due to occur, I think, in April of 2020.
Perfect timing.
Yeah, exactly. My flight out of the country was, I think, about, it was scheduled about a week after the Australian government closed its borders to international travel.
Oh,
And
wow.
so that ended up wiping out about a year of preparation work. The German government obviously withdrew the scholarship, and I was kind of just left without much of a project and with only about 2 years left on my postdoctoral contract with the Australian government at the time. And I could tell that my research output wasn't going to look very great because I'd spent so much effort preparing for this one thing, and then to kind of have the pandemic kind of rug it for me was pretty hard, and I could see the writing on the wall, at least in terms of my research career at that point.
That's
Yeah, it was pretty upsetting. And so while I was forced to stay home for the city where I'm living, which is Melbourne, I think it entered into about a 24-month lockdown, and so I had some time in my hands, and my supervisor was hassling me to sort of try and figure out ways to remain, to try and make my research output look a little bit better for writing reviews and that kind of thing, and tying up some other research papers that I had. And so I was doing those, but really, like, as a chemist, you really need to be at work, to be productive. The kinds of instrumentation that you need just can't be done from home.
right. Not something you're going to do in your kitchen.
Exactly.
Yeah.
I mean, a lot of chemistry can be done in your kitchen, and people obviously do that
Sure.
to great effect. But I mean, in terms of like academic research, you really need NMR spectrometers and mass spectrometers and so on. Like, it's not that the chemistry itself can't be done, but doing it to a level of quality where an academic journal will accept what you've done is impossible.
Sure.
And so, I started looking for other things I might want to do. And I, immersed myself in DeFi as it was kind of taking off. So DeFi summer was around about that time. I'm sure you'll remember.
Yep.
And so I spent a bunch of time in different roles. I sort of gravitated towards the AMMs because I think that they are servicing one of the most interesting needs, right, for blockchain economics to thrive. And I sort of gravitated towards Bancor in a really significant way because I kind of, their mission statement and ethos just sort of resonated with me the most. By the beginning of 2021, I'd been offered a full-time contract, as a researcher there. And so I left my job with the Australian government and started effectively working from home full-time for Bancor, which, at the time didn't really mean very much because working from home was all anyone was able to do anyway.
Sure.
Pretty soon after that, I became the head of research. And just recently, with the development of an on-chain order book system that we call Carbon, I've since taken over leadership of the project.
So, first of all, I mean, I think it's fascinating. I mean, in this industry, there's a lot of people that come from a lot of different careers, everything from legal and poker players and everything else that kind of end up in this space. And then, people that were already in roles as developers or whatever. But for you, this kind of like massively abrupt shift in your career, which it's a pretty dramatic difference, right? I mean, I'm sure there's a scientific approach you can take to everything you do in crypto, but I mean, do you still kind of look back and go, holy crap, I can't believe that I made that dramatic a shift in my life and my career at this point?
Yeah, I mean, I think because I'm the one that went through it, it seems more reasonable because I don't know. It is dramatic, and I'm never going to contest that. But it doesn't feel that way to me. It felt a lot more natural than I think it might sound from the outside.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, in terms of skill set, it's worlds apart, right? A lot of people say, oh yeah, but crypto's quite academic and so on. But people forget, chemistry, the suffix TRY means the application of a physical skill, right? It's like carpentry or surgery or something,
Right.
Chemistry is, I was a bench chemist, it's about, it's about this kind of sixth sense that you have for what molecules are going to be doing in your hands. And yeah, it's different, right? Like I wasn't really a pen and paper chemist. I was think more like grease monkey. You know what I mean?
Yeah. Gotcha. Absolutely. So that is a dramatic difference because you're messing in kind of theoretical. Obviously, math is a part of everything you were doing in science, but this is, again, from the outside, it's a dramatic change. But I guess kind of what happened for you, and I shouldn't put words in your mouth, but I can imagine, because I think it's kind of probably similar to the progression that all of us make that end up in this world 100%, just in different roles, is that once you kind of start climbing into it and getting into it, you find yourself completely absorbed. And
Right.
and I think we all kind of go to how our minds work and what we're used to doing to where we apply what we're doing in this space. But I can definitely understand what you mean by it didn't seem completely abrupt to you at the time. Probably the more abrupt thing for you was just not getting to pursue forward to Germany for that trip. But after that, it was like, okay, well, I can't do much here, and let me try this out. And the next thing you know, you're completely absorbed in it.
Yeah, exactly right.
That's crazy. All right. So you end up at Bancor, and we talked about this a lot in the first time I interviewed you, but Bancor is one of the original AMMs, and really came up with the concept and put it into the market first, and had been around kind of quietly in the background doing its thing and functioning and working and going along. And you joined the team, and you guys were moving forward with a new version of the protocol, which was version 3 last year. And it looked like a fantastic model. A lot of what was the promise of Bancor is the promise of Bancor is kind of this protections against impermanent loss. And then last year, things kind of went south after the launch of version 3. And there were a lot of outside factors that impacted the protocol that we've all experienced in this market. But I'm wondering if you could kind of, first of all, tell us a bit about Bancor and its history, and then tell us kind of what you guys were trying to do with version 3, and then what happened that kind of put you all in a spot where things weren't doing so well.
Yeah, sure. Okay, yeah. So Bancor began life as a project to support community currencies. I think people often forget this whole AMM thing had very humble beginnings. It wasn't necessarily meant as a type of financial instrument in the same way that we think of them today, right? This idea of yield and APY and all this kind of thing wasn't really part of the discussion when Bancor was trying to set up a way where different community currencies could be traded against each other and know their value. In fact, back then it was a fully KYC'd process. If you wanted to create a liquidity pool on Bancor, you would have to call us and we'd send you the forms. It was considered to be regulated in exactly the same way any other exchange would be regulated. So all of there was no permissionless or, access to these things. It was generally community projects themselves or project leaders that would want to establish liquidity, and that's what Bancor was for. So it wasn't really a thing that you did to try and earn interest or whatever. It was meant to service a completely different need. And I think it was a necessary one, without that kind of foundation in even establishing or demonstrating that you could have on-chain token models function as well as they have been, I don't think that would be where we are today.
Absolutely not. Yeah.
And so I think, it's kind of, how your needs change through different parts of your life. I think it's probably true of blockchain as well, right? So in our infancy, AMMs and, this kind of demonstration or this just requirement to sort of nourish communities by allowing their tokens to be tradable was super important. But then as you sort of move into the adolescent stage, things have got to start looking a little bit more grown up. And, this is where protocols, I think, like Uniswap V3 and so on, have kind of really sort of led the charge about creating something that has a very easily described or a very easily characterized financial profile. Right, that it does a certain thing, it is a financial vehicle, and this is how you use it. I think where we sort of destabilized was that the project was still sort of clinging pretty hard to its community currency roots. So way back when Bancor first launched, we did realize very quickly that there was a problem with volatile pairs, where if one of those tokens that you were using in the relay was very quickly outperforming other tokens in the relay, that it would result in a pretty significant loss of value for the people that were providing that liquidity.
Right.
And we called this effect impermanent loss because it can be temporary, right? If the price of that token corrects and those tokens return back to the relay, then you can kind of end up no worse for wear. But it was still concerning. And so I think a lot of what Bancor did, certainly before I was arriving, was researching different ways to address that specific issue, right? How can you provide liquidity without being forced to accept this kind of financial burden? And for a lot of projects and stuff, they don't even want to know about it, right? You can say things like, if you manage your position more carefully, or if you know that something's coming up, just withdraw your liquidity and recontribute it again so that you don't have to put up with this. That it's like, what, this is way too much hassle, I'm not going to do this. So we wanted to create something that was just an out of the box easy solution that would promise to support essentially indefinite liquidity for projects that needed it. And Bancor was then, and is still today, mostly focused on trying to work out how to bring in that kind of, how to establish liquid tokens. And we were mostly speaking with people that were maybe coming from other chains or setting up their project for the first time and so on, that were really looking to just find any way to introduce price discovery and exchangeability with their token on Ethereum. With Bancor version 2, the protocol moved towards a concentrated liquidity model. So this was actually back in April of 2020.
So ahead of the curve.
Exactly. And so we had pretty much exactly the same swap equations. They were just the amplified versions of the Bancor formula, of which constant product is one of the is one subset of possible settings. But we had an amplified curve, and we were using a Chainlink oracle to update its price so as to keep everyone's liquidity in range.
Right.
And the problem with that is that it's abusable, right? If you've got an oracle that's moving the price of liquidity, then someone who is paying attention to the oracle updates can front run it.
Okay.
And you remember back then, MEV wasn't really like something that people spoke about very frequently.
Right.
The oracle front running was something that had to be discovered, and the idea of having a concentrated liquidity curve that you could use this way was really attractive, I think, in theory, but in practice, the sorts of things that miners and MEV bots could do with it was just unsustainable. So we had to very quickly pivot towards version 2.1, which is around about when I was discovering the project myself. And what version 2.1 was trying to achieve was this basically the same thing minus the liquidity amplification, or minus the liquidity concentration. And rather than have a price oracle that tried to keep liquidity within a certain price point, what we instead tried to do was to look at the overall profile of impermanent loss across lots of different volatile pairs, and how much fees revenue could be generated by the protocol, and essentially use that to create a type of insurance net, where the protocol would be destroying BNT tokens and then minting them again if someone required some extra value to basically match the hodl position of their LP at the time that they withdrew. And this went through multiple researchers. So that at the time that I joined the project, I tried to do my best to vet this model, but it was also, supervised by someone named Stefan Losch, who's still our head of economics, and who's written a very large amount of really excellent content on AMMs, especially if you're an academic. And so, the model actually was fairly stable for a very, very long time. And I don't want to blame anyone or anything for what happened, but it was really, in my view, it was a combination of some mega whale accounts, especially during the contagion, from some of the bankruptcies, like from 3 Hours Capital, for example, and Celsius and other things. These guys were all connected to Bancor as liquidity providers in a pretty significant way.
Right.
So I think it's a combination of those effects where we had, something like 40% of the liquidity of the protocol being withdrawn in a very, very short period of time, combined with massive dumping of the BNT token by, some of these mega whales. And then that combined with what I was always kind of trying to push back against, which was a liquidity mining program, which put additional stress on the system, because you and I both appreciate that liquidity mining it sounds great and people get excited about it. But in reality, all it does is debase your token value.
Absolutely.
So there's really layers and layers and layers on top of this thing. And there's enough blame to go around, myself included. But I think that the major learnings from this is that if you've got an economic model, you can't sort of, you can't make it sick with trying to add on additional stuff.
Yeah, don't slap crap on top of it.
Exactly, right. Like I tell people now, it's like you probably could have had impermanent loss protection but no liquidity mining, or the other way around. Right. It's like you just can't have both, right? There is an economic cost to both of these things, and to try and do both simultaneously, I think was insane. And at the time, if you say that to people, you just, they treated you like Judas or something. It was a very unpopular,
don't take my yield away.
Exactly. It was a very unpopular opinion that liquidity mining isn't even real yield, right? It's just a smoke and mirrors, way to sort of get people, attracted to the project. But realistically, that value has to come from somewhere, and just printing tokens doesn't actually get you over the line.
No.
And so it was this symphony of problems really that kind of came to a head in June of last year. And in order to save the project, we put up a proposal to pause the ability of the product to honor its impermanent loss protection component. And this was essentially to stop a runaway effect where the supply of BNT would just be spiraling out of control and so forth. And it was not received, positively, of course.
I'm sorry to laugh, but I couldn't imagine.
Fine.
Yeah.
No, please. No, and it was devastating.
Sure.
There's been there have been threats made against my life, and
God.
it was terrible. And I remember that day, right, where I actually had to get on a Twitter Spaces and explain to people what was going on, and it just, it was traumatizing, honestly.
I'm sure. I can't even imagine.
And to be that, and I had just gotten back from doing all of these presentations and things overseas, where I'd been telling people that we've got this new thing, and Bancor V3 is really interesting, and I just felt like, I felt like a charlatan, honestly, like a fraud.
Yeah.
And it made me, it was just awful. And so after that call on Twitter where everything was done, it was like, right, what are we going to do about it? And we tried to make it as much as possible sort of a community, a community oriented plan, right, where we wanted to bring in a lot of different voices and that kind of thing. But I think during a crisis, you really need leadership, Yeah. And communities they want to help, and everyone in there is generally extremely well-meaning. But some of the ideas that come out of it, right, I think when you put someone on the spot and ask them to suggest something, they kind of just reach for whatever's nearest,
Yeah.
They'll look at other projects and other things that they've heard about and go, well, maybe we should do this, without sort of understanding what its implications are and that sort of thing. So immediately afterwards, I would say that a lot of those early discussions didn't go very far. I tried my best to sort of summarize a lot of what was being discussed back then, and put it in a blog entry on the Bancor governance pages. But I think where we really started to get back on track, which is when I just started researching, other ways that I think that we can actually approach on-chain liquidity that's not necessarily AMM-like. And, from that sort of work, it actually began as a way to sort of restructure the pools on V3 so that we could, have a slightly less, let's say, less severe exposure to IL on certain pairs and that kind of thing. But then, continuing in that vein, eventually we came up with this entirely new model that is, I would say, worlds apart from traditional on-chain liquidity models, and looks a lot more like these financial primitives that I think people are looking for in DeFi in its adolescence, right? Which is where we kind of started this conversation. So yeah, in a way, it kind of forced our hand, and it's like honestly, it's like when you accidentally crash your dad's car when you're 12 years old or something. And now you've got to grow up and start doing stuff properly. And I think that's kind of where we're at.
Well, I want to get into kind of what the fix was and then move into Carbon. I will tell you, I was so excited for your V3 launch after having met you and talked to you and heard how you guys, what you were planning, what you were building, and where you thought it was going to go. And so I'm nowhere near as devastated as you or people who had a lot more money in Bancor than I did were at the time. But I was just devastated for you guys because I kept trying to put myself in the shoes of what you guys must have been going through. And I remember watching the Telegram chats and all of the ideas and all of the gnashing of teeth and all of the anger and all the sadness and everything that was going on in there, and thinking, oh my God, I don't know if they can do this from the perspective of the community. I just can't imagine that this is going to come out of somebody submitting an idea and everybody voting on it. So I was really cool to hear you say just now that you guys really realized that at some point you just had to take control, take leadership, and say, okay, as much as we want this to be a community-baked solution, right now we need to solve the problem at hand. Right. And I think you probably elongated your suffering a bit more during that phase, but I think it was for the right reasons. It just probably wasn't the best step you could take. But in the chaos of all of that, I'm not sure I could have thought through anything, man. I got to tell you, I felt so bad for you guys. It was just, and I don't know why it felt so personal to me. I mean, I got to know you guys. I liked you. I liked the protocol. I liked what you were doing. I liked your ethos and how you were approaching everything. But I guess it was also that I felt like so much was riding on the history of Bancor for this version 3 to kind of like push Bancor back up into the limelight. And I think that was the most brutal thing, to have all of those circumstances happen together simultaneously to impact the protocol and the investors and the members that way, was just painful to watch. So anyway, I'm glad you guys are starting to write things here and figure out the best way forward. So what has been kind of the plan moving forward? What are you guys doing now to try to recover? I will assume that, like all, one of the things I say all the time to people is this is a massive experiment. If you're not ready to be the subject of an experiment and have potentially some pain from it, then you probably should not be in DeFi, because this is not a safe place yet. Right. We're not there yet. And there are a million outside forces or inside forces that could impact this experiment, but it doesn't take away, how people feel and as angry as they get and threatening your life and everything else. But I'm assuming that there's probably not a path where everyone is made whole again. So is that kind of one of the decisions you had to make, was, hey, we've got to just move this forward and save the overall protocol and have a better model? Or kind of what were you guys thinking, and what was the next steps for you?
No, I think that the motivation is still to recover and, I try to stay away from promises like make whole, for example, but
Sure.
but that's certainly my motivation. So I want everyone who is, who's stuck out, is stuck out all of this stress and horror on the protocol to eventually, look back and be rewarded for, for their conviction, I guess.
Right.
And so the whole point, right? I guess at the core, the very first thing that we needed to do is to develop a way to generate like proper value, right? So not this kind of, and I this isn't a slight at anyone, by the way, but not this kind of hand wavy, Rube Goldberg machine sort of tokenomics type value where if you squint hard enough, you can sort of see what's happening, but like actual, just like regular like revenue. Do you know what I mean?
Right.
Where the protocol is actually generating stuff. And then the question is how do you use that revenue, especially in a system as complex as V2.1 and V3. And actually the easiest way and the fairest way that you can do it is to just have the protocol consistently buy and burn BNT from the market. And this is, because of its AMM structure, this actually returns, things like Link and ETH and DAI and everything else back to the liquidity pools and helps to reduce the current deficit, right? The difference between what tokens the protocol has and what its users are expecting to withdraw. And so this mechanism is it's so much simpler to explain, and I think that it's going to resonate with people. And the DAO recently, voted to commit 100% of the protocol's revenue to this process.
Wow.
And so the idea is that, absolutely. My motivation is to see the deficit closed forever. And, if that wasn't my goal, I'm not sure what my goal would be, honestly.
Right.
And so after, I think after realizing that you need to have something that is, demonstrable, that to an economist or, to a trader or, your fiduciary, your accountant, to have a business model that actually makes that like sense on that sort of level, right, I think is a very helpful change in the way that at least I'm thinking about project tokenomics and that kind of thing. I used to be a lot more comfortable with complex mechanisms, but now I think that, the simpler the better. And if it's value, then it's obviously, protocols should be buying literally buying their own token if it's a token-based system. And if it's not a token-based system, maybe they can be adding tokens to a treasury or something or whatever it happens to be. But the distance between that value realization and the value itself needs to be as short as possible.
Sure.
And I think that's the direction that we've taken with Carbon. But yeah, the motivation is 100% to try and restore the protocol back to surplus so that our liquidity providers don't have to suffer when they withdraw.
That's great. And are there other core things or changes that before we get to Carbon, that you're making to Bancor itself that are important for people to understand and the way V3 functions?
No, I mean, not really. So the only real change has been that the impermanent loss protection part is gone. 3 is still there, and we've got active proposals from different projects and stuff to continue supporting liquidity and things there. But I think that there has been a pretty significant change in in the DAOs, in the way that the DAO thinks about supporting other projects with liquidity, right? Because you can do all of these things where we created liquidity pairs and so on. And I would say, at least personally, that it was mostly out of altruism that I wanted to do that.
Right.
And after what happened in June, I think that we didn't, like, at least me personally, when you look around for support and find, you're sort of standing all alone, in the desert, it's kind of taken a lot of that altruism away from me. And so I think that that's probably true of the community as well.
Sure.
And so I would say that V3 and V2.1, they really were these, products that were trying to help new projects bootstrap liquidity, right? Because we, as a community currency project, and I still consider V3 and V2.1 to be community currency projects, I think that we've just kind of exhausted that motivation well. And so, I will say that while V3 and V2.1 are not being changed necessarily any more than they already have, the way that governance and things operates with them has changed significantly. I can tell that, our DAO just really isn't interested anymore in taking on these kinds of risks to help projects get their feet under them, which is a shame. And, but I guess, in a capitalist world, you can't really afford to be too loose or too charitable with the way that you run a project. And I think our community is learning that. So yeah, it's V2.1 and V3, they fundamentally haven't changed apart from the fact that the impermanent loss insurance mechanism has been taken away. But I don't expect, as new projects approach the protocol and seek to get whitelisted through that DAO process, it seems to me very unlikely that the DAO will approve any more new tokens, for example.
Right. Well, look, it's very difficult to blame anyone for having that position at this point. I think I completely understand that. No, number one, to not hurt Bancor and the community, but also, not having to deal with being responsible for helping other projects get there when there's risk there. So I completely get that. Completely get that. Okay. So just a couple of more questions before we get to carbon. I apologize, but there's so much in this that I think that's valuable lessons for people. And I think this whole thing that we're doing in this space is about learning from each other and these experiments. From your perspective, Bancor is an old brand in the space relatively speaking. Do you guys feel like that the brand and the community will really be able to kind of grow and build on itself again? Do you feel like there's enough sustained support from people that stayed around and from what you have there in the protocol and the technology that and I know the answer to the question is yes, but I'm just kind of curious kind of what that's been like to think about kind of the growth path forward and the impact it's had on Bancor as a brand and as a community.
Yeah, I think, so absolutely. The answer is yes. I'm convinced that the community grows and we grow. I think it is akin to, these types of, we see these kinds of things all the time where, maybe, a sports team will lose a really great player or something, stories like Billy Beane and the Oakland Athletics sort of come to mind, where, something bad can happen, but the community will still sort of rally behind some new direction and see that sports team through to the championships or whatever.
Right.
I think that what's happening here is kind of similar, but obviously more business and crypto oriented, but same idea. There can be disasters, and we've seen those kinds of things in history as well in the corporate world. But I think that you can, as you continue, what you'll find is that you kind of recompose your community. People that were here just for the liquidity mining rewards, for example, probably will never come back again.
Sure.
And that's fine because they kind of get when they get out of their seat, someone else comes and sits down in it.
Yeah.
And you end up, back having the sorts of conversations that actually brought me to Bancor in the first place. And, I was getting really tired of talking about APYs and yield, honestly. I really wanted to create something that was a little bit more highbrow, a little bit more, it's a legitimate financial thing that actually does stuff.
Sure.
And I think that the communities, in a way, we've kind of started from scratch. There are a lot of, not entirely from scratch, because a lot of the community members that we had before are still around.
Right.
But a lot of the people that were sort of on the fence or, that weren't particularly interested in AMMs or DeFi or Bancor have left. And, since we've had to start again, I would say that now there's a much higher concentration of community members that are, that are much closer to the heart of what Bancor was about in the first place.
Right.
And the newcomers are also sort of more aligned, I think, with the overall project objectives. So, I've never wanted Bancor to be like what, is lovingly, but I think, also a little bit, a little bit derogatorily to as a degen protocol. I didn't want us to be a yield farm or anything like that. And when you do have liquidity mining rewards and so on, you do attract a certain type of person. And I think that they started to sort of crowd out, the community members and DAO participants that had a much more sophisticated view of things. And so, yeah, look, it's cleared out a lot of that type of individual. And I don't harbor any ill will or anything to people that have decided to leave. I think it's not even anything that anyone should be blamed for. It was an emergent property. The community wants all of these things, and DeFi was what it was, and that attracts, people that love those kinds of things and so on. It's kind of get this snowballing effect. And now that the snowball's melted, you can, we just recompose and start again and move forward. But I don't have any doubt. And if you come to our Discord and have a look at what's going around, sure, like we don't have the crowds that we used to on those calls, but the quality of the discussion is infinitely better.
Nice.
And I think that, if we continue in that trend, I'm absolutely convinced that we can have we can maintain that quality of conversation now perpetually. And that's my goal.
Well, and I think human beings love when companies, projects, whatever, go back to their roots, focus on core, make things simple again. And they love the story of recovery, right? They love the story of redemption. And I think that's kind of the path you guys are on. And I think it makes a lot of sense. You chased a few shiny objects in the past, got away from what made, the evolution of Bancor is part of it, but also coming back to kind of understanding the simplicity that you needed to get to. All right, I don't want to waste a lot of your time. I want to really get into CAR because I'd love to hear how it came about and why, and tell me what it is and how it benefits the market and users, if you could.
Yeah, certainly. So Carbon is really first of all, Carbon is an anagram for Bancor, right? It's the same letters.
Love it.
So Carbon is literally the answer to the problem of, what do we do now? And I mean that in sort of at every layer. So, after what happened in June, we really needed something that could legitimately claim to earn revenue, right? At a protocol level, right? Not sort of the APY stuff that you get in DeFi, but actually like a protocol revenue generating mechanism, because we've got a lot of deficit to clear up, and that has to come from somewhere.
Sure.
And also, what is a product that people actually want to use, right, for its own sake? Because if it's a revenue generating product on the protocol side, then it's not a revenue generating product on the user side. Right. It's, you can't have this kind of, passive yield narrative or mentality at the same time as trying to support a protocol that's actually self-productive.
Sure.
So I think it came down to what is it that people are complaining about? Like, what do people expect of trading protocols that they can't find when they arrive in DeFi? And I was paying very close attention to sort of the order book that we were getting from Uniswap and others, but I wasn't convinced that their protocols actually met that demand, or if it was even designed to meet that demand. I think that, for example, with Uniswap v3, it's true that there is this interesting, limit order like behavior, but only if the user, happens to be fast enough to do a certain thing, right? It seems to me that limit order function is more like a consequence, like something that you get for free with the way that Uniswap v3 is designed, right? Rather than being something that was like the motivating reason for that protocol to exist, if you know what I mean.
Right.
And I think that it's also clear that users on Uniswap v3 are using it not for that limit order function, but for fees, right? This is
Sure.
that is their sole motivation for being there. And if you don't have to look around too far to find some professional trader or someone who is aspiring to be a professional trader about the fact that they can't really set an on-chain limit order anywhere. Right. There are these, keeper systems and oracle systems and, CowSwap and other things that are delivering, I guess, like that kind of service, but it's not really a book, right? People want to see where the liquidity is and what it looks like. And I think that it's a completely different sort of structure to actually be, to have something that can be interrogated transparently rather than something that's kind of in the hands of node operators or similar.
Makes sense. Total sense.
And so, so what we did was to sort of re-examine bonding curves and whether or not the way that they behave still makes sense. And the thing about the Uniswap limit order argument that I don't like is that in no order book in the world are you obligated to refund someone who's traded against you, right? Like if you set a limit order to sell your Bitcoin at like 60K and someone buys it from you and you get that price, there would be a riot if Coinbase said, "Oh, actually, we're going to reverse that transaction."
Of course, absolutely.
You know what I mean?
Yeah.
But that's exactly what happens on Uniswap in a limit order context, right?
Right.
As a market maker, sure, like you're not getting your limit order refunded. You are just making the market, and if you're competing for that that 30% spread on the fee, then maybe you're fine with that. But a lot of people aren't fine with it, and so the motivation was, well, what if we just take that away, right? What if you've got same sorts of bonding curve mechanics that that Bancor started with way back when, but instead of saying that you can trade tokens in either direction according to one bonding curve, why don't we have two bonding curves and each one of them determines which way the tokens trade in their own direction?
Oh.
And this means that a trade in one direction is irreversible. And you get a lot of really interesting, positive outcomes to this straight away. So the first one is that limit orders are final. If someone buys tokens from you, they cannot then sell them back to you at the same price.
Right.
The analogy that I usually give people is to imagine yourself as like a pawnbroker, right? And if someone comes in with a Rolex that you offer them $9,000 for, it's kind of your prerogative to then put it on the shelf for $10,000.
Right.
Whereas, models like Uniswap V3, they say, no, if you bought it for 9,000, you must sell it at 9,000,
Which kind of defeats the entire purpose of participating.
Well, as a market maker, maybe not.
Right,
certainly as a trader, it does, because your ambition is to buy something at a low price and sell it at a high price.
Of course.
And to realize that there are no DeFi products that allow you to do that is kind of shocking.
Yeah.
At least on the making side. For the taking side, sure. I mean, if you happen to be on a protocol at a certain time and you can see that there's a price that's attractive to you and you take it, and then you see that same thing, selling for a price that you find attractive later and you take that, then sure, you've bought low and sold high. But in terms of making, like actually setting up an order to do those things, you can't really do it anyway.
No.
Like, there are oracle systems and keepers and that sort of thing, and centralized systems that allow for it. But as like a true DeFi, a true DeFi primitive, there really isn't anything. And so we're like, okay, you know what? I think that's the target we can hit. That's the niche that we can occupy.
Big, nice hole in the market.
Yeah, exactly. And, and I'd say it's pretty significant. You know, like it's not a small niche. It's something that people are actively complaining about.
Well, and the other side of that is not only is it something that people actively complain about, but it will be something in the future. The next kind of run-in of people into this space will be an even greater problem to folks who are used to the centralized world and their trading experiences. Right. So that will also make it well positioned.
Right. And so, when we're looking at that, we're like, okay, fine. So we've found this thing, but in this space, you can't just be like 2x better. You need to be 10x better. And so, if our only selling point is, okay, here's something that you can do on Coinbase or Binance, but now you can do it on chain. It's just not good enough, right? You need to be able to use the blockchain resources in a way that achieves something that Coinbase can't do or that Binance can't. And so what we've done there is to take the limit order concept and then roll it into what we're calling a strategy machine. And so the idea here is, and I can walk you through it.
Yeah,
It's
please.
not too complicated. If you go to Coinbase like right now, and set up a limit order to sell your Bitcoin at 60K, for example.
Right.
When that order completes, essentially someone trades against you, right? They take your Bitcoin, you take their USDC, for example, and then that USDC ends up back in, some account associated with you, right? It's not back on the book doing something else. So imagine if you could tell Coinbase, okay, rather than, giving me my USDC back, I want all of the USDC that I get for selling Bitcoin at this particular price to be recommitted back to the book to rebuy Bitcoin at 50 grand, for example. Right. And so it's like, take the capital that you're giving me that's just being sent to my account, and I want you to put it back into the book. And this is what Carbon does. So and rather than being able to set limit orders at just single prices, we have that range order like structure. So on the Coinbase side of things, if you're pretty confident that Bitcoin is going to get to 60K, then fine, right? You can say, I'm selling all of my Bitcoin at this price. But that's not how traders think, right? They say, there's some probability that it's going to get to 60K. There's some probability it's going to get to 61K, 62K, and so on. And they'll striate these orders throughout that price range.
Absolutely.
Right. And, there might be a dozen or so of these things. And so with Carbon, you actually just decide the range, and it will set up an infinite number of orders through that range, right? It's continuous the same way that all bonding curves are continuous over their price ranges, but it's irreversible. So it's a bonding curve that only trades in one direction. And as those tokens are as you're collecting tokens from one side, so for example, the sale of Bitcoin for USDC, those USDCs appear in its own sibling bonding curve that has its own parameters that the user decides that are automatically rebuying or offering to rebuy Bitcoin as it pulls back. And so this allows you to set up legitimate automatic like channel trading strategies. And in a sense, we are, I think, the first buy low, sell high protocol, which is like I said, it's a shocking realization to have after we're sort of so long in the tooth in DeFi right now. But this is really coming back to what I was saying several times in this conversation, which is I really think we're moving into our adolescence now, and this is a much more grown-up way of thinking about DeFi.
And I happen to be incredibly sympathetic to this strategy, because a lot of what I have a company that has a trading tools mostly with people in the centralized space. One of the things that's killed me is that we have a mean reversion indicator that's my favorite tool to use to trade with, but pairs will end up in a range for a long period of time. And I can automate the bot trades and automate the take profits, but I need to get to the point where I can identify that channel. And I'm assuming that at some point with an API from you guys, I could even do this programmatically, but be able to identify this channel and then make those trades. But there is literally nowhere I can set up to do that, right? I can't use the data and information I have in the decentralized world yet. So this actually solves a big problem. And in our community, we have 7,000 people in our community. This is kind of something that keeps them out of DeFi, right? Because they are traders, and this is what they do. And right now, all they can do is go to Binance or Coinbase or wherever to at least get some semblance of this. This is far superior on a personal level. And I do think you're filling a really big hole.
Yeah, thank you. I'm convinced we are as well. And everyone I talk to about it is the type of reaction that we get is like, why wasn't this done yet?
Exactly.
Like, surely it's not that hard. And the reality is it actually is pretty hard. There's various design aspects. Not everyone is sort of steeped in smart contracts to understand just how difficult these kinds of things are. But it's even then, like, no amount of difficulty justifies something like this not existing. And I'm, yeah, it's a shame that it took, the shake up last year to sort of refocus, to refocus the project on this, because I think had we been more critical of the direction that AMMs were headed, and especially our own project, I think we probably would have done it a lot sooner. It's just so obvious once you see it. And yeah, if we weren't distracted by things like liquidity mining rewards and other things, I'm certain that we would have arrived at this conclusion a lot sooner.
And so and this is working in conjunction with Bancor, or completely separate from Bancor?
No, Bancor is Bancor, right? Bancor is the project. So
this is just another product on Bancor.
It's another product, yeah. So because you cannot call it V4,
right?
Because it's not the next version.
It's not the same product.
Yeah, exactly. It's a completely different thing. And so, we thought that, if you go back over our governance documents and things, people have been complaining about like the Bancor logo and the Bancor word for a long time. And I think we just thought of, it's a good opportunity to sort of rally behind some new idea, right?
Yeah.
Like,
makes people feel fresh.
Exactly. It's a symbol, right? And, I think that the fact that it's an anagram of carbon means that, people can see that we're not hiding from our identity or anything like that.
Right.
That was kind of the idea of it. But to have some, but to still have some new flag for people to fly, and some new idea, right? It just kind of encapsulates, everything that we're doing, right? Which is it's a complete rearrangement. The letters aren't even in the same order anymore. It's great. A completely different protocol. It's not an AMM anymore. It's something else.
Yes.
And everything that you thought you knew about how, on-chain liquidity works can be different. And so I think having something that is, that has a different look, like in terms of the branding, and a different icon and that kind of thing, and a different name, is important, to make sure that when people are approaching the protocol, they sort of check their misapprehensions or their presuppositions at the door, and sort of consider it for what it is, right? Yeah. Like, imagine if Microsoft decided that, rather than being a software company that they are today, that instead they're going to, make electric cars or something, like it would just be, for us, it's like, it feels like that level of, that much of a pivot.
Yeah.
And I think that it just, it doesn't really make sense to not signal somehow that a profound change has happened. And so using a different name and a different icon, it just, it helps, it helps signal to people that something dramatic has changed, and that there's something, it gets considered in its own context, right?
Yeah.
By its own merits.
Love it.
I think that's the motivation for it.
Functionally, I mean, obviously there's the role of the trader in this thing. Things like pairs choices and functionality that will be available in the system are exposed to people that want to utilize it. Is that all kind of happening with the team? Is the DAO going to be involved in kind of decision making regarding, I don't know, what's available on the platform?
No, it's 100% permissionless. So there's no whitelisting. There's no like whitelisting process or anything like that. And you don't need one in this system, because there is no risk to the protocol anymore.
Right.
So traders can do whatever they want. There will be, there are some, mathematical limitations. So for example, I think that we've checked everything, we've checked all like sort of reasonable token pairs, but things like Shiba Inu versus wrapped Bitcoin can be kind of problematic.
Right.
Because at a decimality level, because wrapped Bitcoin is only an 8 decimal token, and Shiba Inu is 18 decimals.
Right.
And Shiba Inu is only worth like 10 to the negative $5, and Bitcoin is worth, approximately 10 to the $5. You end up with 20 orders of magnitude difference in the price there. Now, we can still support these kinds of tokens, but it means that, there are, that you run into some issues when you're providing like too much or too little liquidity, for example.
Sure.
So for those kinds of extreme cases where there just aren't enough digits, right, in memory to, not just in memory, but on Ethereum in a block to sort of calculate a price, some of those tokens, won't work very well. But
Sure.
things like Shiba Inu versus DAI, like whatever, right? Like we've scanned, I think, price ranges from 10 to the 96 down to 10 to the negative 96, and all of those tend to work quite well, with those being the actual boundaries of the precision that we can achieve. But we've also got a forwards compatible method that we're continuing to work on, and we actually think that we can extend that even a little bit. And so things like, if you really wanted to create a Shiba Inu versus wrap Bitcoin pair, you could. But I think that we're kind of in the diminishing returns at that stage, because if that is if trading a fraction of a cent token versus a something worth $100,000, it's that problem of, if you wanted to buy a Ferrari, right? Maybe a Ferrari is, I don't know, 100 grand. I have no idea, but you can't buy like a fraction of a Ferrari,
right?
You're either paying 100 grand or you're paying 200 grand if you want two of them.
Exactly.
Right? You can't pay 50 grand and get half a Ferrari. And that's just, there are indivisible ways associated with these tokens. And unfortunately, if you want to buy one way of wrapped Bitcoin, that's going to cost you like 10 to the 20 Shiba Inu. And that's just the unfortunate reality of the price difference there, combined with the decimality difference. So apart from that, essentially every other, all normal token pairs are totally supported, and people can do whatever they want.
That's awesome. And like I said, I'm assuming there'll be the ability for people to automate against this in terms of utilizing an API to connect to the system as well, not just utilizing the interface. Yeah.
Yep, correctly. We've also got a software development kit that allows for things like optimal trade routing and stuff to be discovered. So yeah, we've put in a lot of work to make sure that anyone who wants to interact with the system, however they want to interact with it, is free to do that.
That's great. And have you guys been kind of talking through this with traders and folks that trade for a living, or that might be interested in this? And what's the reactions been like?
Yeah, it's been overwhelmingly positive. So yeah, traders, institutions and so forth. It's been very, very positive. We've actually just completed a round of user interviews with, people that have, that have some sort of trading like theme to either their Twitter profile or a YouTube channel or something like that. We've just kind of, asked them if they would mind, spending some time going over the app with us and working out if it's intuitive enough, what we need to change before launch. And the responses there were absolutely overwhelmingly positive. I think for a lot of people, the feedback that I got from from my colleagues who were doing the interview process is that for a lot of users, when it clicked for them what they were actually doing, they suddenly got very excited.
Nice.
Right? Like, for the anecdotes, like, does this mean I don't have to withdraw like suddenly? And does this mean that I can decide, like if I want to pause my strategy, right? There are all kinds of things we didn't speak about, but on Carbon, because each user's position is unique, right? And we don't pool funds, you have like 100% control. If you wanted to like change your ranges or pause your strategy or whatever, you can do all of that just by updating the parameters associated with your strategy, rather than having to, withdraw your tokens and put them back to another thing, right? So it's a very gas efficient, very nimble way of handling things. And yeah, I think for a lot of people, they were like, I thought that we had to do it the other way, like
there was no other way.
Yeah, there was some technical reason or something why I had to pay all this gas, or why I had to, why I had to accept that if I didn't withdraw in time, that I was going to, lose my money. And the other thing is that, for people that are paying much closer attention, the irreversibility of Carbon's orders also means that it can't be sandwich attacked, for example, and it can't be front run.
No.
And so, you can front run it, but it just means that someone else's transaction will revert rather than forcing them to pay a higher price.
Nice.
So there's all kind, and for some people, they're like, I thought sandwich attacks were unavoidable.
Right.
It's just something it's just like, this is just what we have to put up with in DeFi.
Exactly.
It's like, no, actually, it's a consequence of the symmetry of that position. If you set up your protocol differently, sandwich attacks just become impossible. And I think for some people, it was kind of a bittersweet realization that, that things you don't have to put up with it, but also that it's kind of sad that you've been putting up with it if you
For
didn't
so
have to.
long. Exactly. Exactly.
Yeah. So yeah, no, the responses have been like really, really encouraging, honestly.
Amazing.
But I can tell that we've still got a lot of, a long way to go, because obviously we've kind of curated the kinds of people that we want to review the app for us.
Sure.
And that has that's got one, really excellent outcome, which is that that they're sort of qualified to, to comment. And I mean that in like the nicest possible way. I mean, people that understand DeFi and understand trading and that kind of thing. But on the other hand, they might not necessarily, and a randomly selected DeFi crowd who you're going to have to sort of educate on some of these concepts. So right. I can tell there's going to be a long way to go, and I'm doing my best to produce as much, educational content as I can. But, at the same time, I consider this to be a much more targeted product.
I was going to say, you have there's a pretty significant group of folks that you can target out of the gate for this that
exactly
will adapt to it immediately and be excited.
Yeah, exactly. This isn't like everyone in DeFi should use this product kind of thing.
Right.
This is if you're doing this kind of stuff, then we've got a product that's going to be very appealing and very intuitive for you. And there may be people that's like, I don't know how to do this. And it's like, that's fine. There are other DeFi products that you can use. And we're not being elitist or anything. It's just that, we've constructed this to service a very specific need.
Yeah.
And if you don't have that need, that's okay. Like, you can still hang out and we can, you're still welcome to chat with us on Discord, and you might even have some governance, suggestions and all that kind of stuff. But really the use of the product is for one very specific application. And, I think that I'm waiting to see, right? I think that argument, by the way, also equally applies to things like Uniswap v3. But, I think that it's done a good job in its marketing of kind of making it seem more general purpose, or, making it seem like it's appropriate for anyone to use. And I think that in a way that's, that worked out well for them in the beginning, but there's been a sort of a lot of criticism, I think, over the last few months about, toxic flow and other things. I'm sure you've seen
absolutely
the kind of thing. So yeah, we'll see. But yeah, we've got work to do, but I'm convinced that we're going to end up in exactly where we need to be.
Do you guys have a general time frame? I don't like to make people give me specific time frames, but do you have a general time frame for when this starts to become used and available?
We're at the end of the first audit right now.
Okay, great.
And we've got 2 more lined up. Yeah, like I said, there's a couple of things that we're still working on, but it'll be sooner rather than later. Q1 is my goal still.
Wow. Okay. Oh, that's fast. I didn't realize it was coming that soon. Do you worry in the history of Bancor? Bancor kind of was overshadowed by people copying what Bancor was doing. Do you worry about that now for Carbon?
Yeah, I mean, sure. I mean, I guess imitation is the most sincere form of flattery anyway.
Sure.
But yeah, look, I think for the genesis of DeFi, we haven't really done anything about enforcing our intellectual property rights. Right. And, it's kind of nice to have that flexibility, especially now as many of these projects which are infringing on our patent are actually starting to really get established as, as companies, right? Not as sort of DAOs or, little sort of volunteer projects that people work on. Right. But as, actual legitimate enterprises. So that's that's an interesting thing, but I think it's not necessarily that's not my focus. I think that if we build the best product and people recognize it, I can only name one fork of a project, like the actual, full on fork that has ever succeeded. And that was SushiSwap. Right. That's
a good point.
That's the exception, not the rule.
Yeah.
Right. All of these forks tend to die out. Right. And, we say that, especially people in our community like to sort of antagonize, Uniswap and Hayden Adams and stuff. I wish they wouldn't, but they about, sort of ripping up Bancor's idea, and, whether they are or they aren't is something that I guess will remain to be seen. But there is no question that their code base is unique, right? Like it wasn't just a control C, control V sort of fork of stuff the same way Sushi was of Uni V2. It was like a from scratch rewrite. Um, and to call Uniswap or any AMM a fork of that at that level is not really doing it the justice it deserves. So yeah, look,
Sure.
I do expect that the idea may inspire others to do something similar. And in fact, even while we were developing this stuff, we saw some products, I guess, sort of leaning in the same direction as what we're doing start to come out. So like Muffin Finance, for example, on Binance is kind of, it has that same sort of irreversibility component to it. And, there's another project I can't remember the name of that's got like it's actually good that I can't remember their name because it's got a terrible white paper and that kind of thing. But whatever, it's, there are some people that are approaching the same thing. And
Right.
in a way, it gives me more confidence that the idea is good.
Yep.
No, I don't think anyone's execution is quite there. I do think that we've got the absolute best, right? We've done our homework. We know exactly how this thing operates. I think the only protocol now that's got this dual bonding curve system and that can implement it in such a gas efficient way. And if it becomes successful, I fully expect at least a dozen or so sort of low quality forks of it to appear. But in general, the big projects and the ones that care about themselves and the space, they don't do that, right? They sort of borrow ideas and move on in a different direction. And yeah, that's fine. We've patented a lot of the aspects of carbon that I think are the most important. And if someone figures out, a way to do it that doesn't infringe, then all the more power to them, honestly. Like the whole point of having IP in the first place is to foster innovation, not to crush it. So, if someone comes up with something better or a new invention that achieves, that meets the needs of DeFi in a more complete way, then I'm actually happy for them to do that. I still tell people I think Curve V1, right, is one of the most significant, innovations in DeFi. It's one of my favorite protocols.
Nice.
And I am a fan. So if people start forking it, right, and it's low quality, of course, I'm going to think that, that it was a waste of time and it's probably a rug or something waiting to happen. But if it inspires other people to start thinking about DeFi in a different way, to me, that's only a positive.
That's awesome. That's great. Two more questions. How has the team held up through all of the last 9-10 months?
Yeah, I mean, it's been stressful. I think that, Bancor in general is extremely selective about, who it offers contracts to.
Sure.
And I think that did kind of show, well, the fruits of that selectivity, were born over the last year. Because, I think the status quo in DeFi, when your project, gets derailed, is just throw your hands up in the air and walk away, right?
Right.
And there's no shortage of these kinds of these examples. But for us, really, like basically no one left.
Nice.
Everyone was upset, everyone was stressed, and it was really. I can't explain just how trying a time it was, like we couldn't do anything, if you went on Telegram or Discord or Twitter or anything, there was a lynch mob essentially just waiting there, to say terrible things to you. And so, yeah, I honestly, like, now that we're sort of coming out the other side of it and I feel like the project is healing and our community is healing, I can't, I could not ask for, a more respectable group of people to be working with every day.
That's awesome.
Yeah, to have people that are willing to put up with what we've put up with, and and stick it through and see the new product get released. You can't buy that kind of loyalty. Everyone who's working with the project now absolutely believes in it. That's and this great. Is that's. Yeah, I mean, it's nice to know that. It's still a shame that we had to go through what we went through to discover it. But yeah, I mean, the team has held up well. It's, there has been trauma. There have been, people calling each other in confidence and crying on the phone and that kind of thing. It was a really, as you can imagine, a really traumatic time.
Oh my God, I can't imagine. Yeah.
But yeah, we're still here,
Yeah.
and I think that counts for a lot.
Probably stronger, smarter, more committed, and those are all positive things. That's great. Down in that line of things, out of all the time that you've been at Bancor, or in just the last 9-10 months, if you were talking to another organic chemist who was taking a deep dive into DeFi and thinking about working or starting a project, or just anybody starting a project, what do you think, one or two lessons that you've learned through all of this would be most important to impart to them?
Yeah, it's really hard to answer. I think that the first thing is that having a DAO and having it be responsible for things. These aren't bad ideas, obviously, right? And we still do that, right? We still are a DAO. But I think that having a DAO doesn't mean that you just do nothing, you know what I mean? Or, say, well, if this is what the DAO wants, then this is what the DAO shall have. It's a process of discussion, right? You need to make sure that you are doing enough, that you're providing sufficient information and you're active enough in certain discussions to make sure that the DAO is even qualified, right, to make the most important decisions.
Yep.
And so, yeah, I think that, the approach of, well, it's in the DAO's hands and I'm powerless to do anything about it. Like, that's not how it works, right? You might be powerless in the sense that you can't control the DAO, right? And you shouldn't even try to control the DAO. But if it's your project and you know something, then you should be there, with well expressed opinions, and people will listen to those. The other thing that I would say is in a way, is the exact opposite, right? So lesson number 2 is be careful of lesson number 1, right? That just because it's your project and you founded it, or you think you have the best understanding of it, doesn't necessarily mean that you do. There will be people that are, and sometimes in a way it's very difficult to tease apart legitimate criticism from trolling, and that's a skill that I have yet to master, but that's the kind of skill that you need to master, because there will be people that sound like belligerent trolls that are just there to upset you, but they're not, right? They're actually academically or whatever, they're motivated to just tell you that there's something wrong and that there's something that can be done. And often your community is going to try and crush that. But negative criticism is super important, right? And you said, what would I say to another chemist, right? We know how brutal peer review can be.
Yeah.
Right. And there's always reviewer 3, which is like the troll of the reviewer process that doesn't really contribute anything and has mostly unhelpful things to say. They're the ones that you need to ignore. But that doesn't mean that reviewers 1 and 2 are mistaken just because they didn't want to approve your paper, right? Sometimes they do actually have things that you need to change or that you haven't considered. And I think in crypto, right, we get so used to the enormity of just garbage that you have to deal with on Twitter and everything else, that legitimate criticisms can sometimes get washed out, right, or diluted out. And so lesson number 2 is learn to find those criticisms, because they can dramatically improve the way that you do things. And it's important to let your mind be changed. I think that those are the 2 things that I would say.
Those are fantastic lessons. Mark, I've taken a lot of your time, and I got to tell you, after 2 interviews with you, I think you're one of my favorite interviewers. I thoroughly enjoy chatting with you. I'm very excited about what you guys have done to kind of dig out of the pain and suffering. And I hope the community is excited about the commitment and work you guys have put in to make a difference, and they'll stick with you. And I think this has a ton of opportunity for success with Carbon. So thank you so much for joining me today.
Yeah, it's my pleasure, Brad. Thank you for having me.
Thanks, man.